Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Games Industry Executive Summary. This is Casey coming back after a week off, and we had a really good episode last week. I listened to it, so thank you so much to both Patrick and for whatever reason the name is not coming to my mind right now. I'm blanking almost. Good Lord, how can I forget? The Dashing Dave Fear, of course. I had to say the dashing first because otherwise I would not remember. We have a new guest this time around. This is your first time. Is that correct, Nick?
It is, yeah.
Welcome on board. I need to find you a nickname. I was going to say the architect, Nick Murray. Welcome on board. And we'll see if that one sticks, Nick.
It makes me think a bit too much of the second Matrix movie with the kind
Yes,
of
that is
architect guy that
exactly.
was. He was so dull, though. Um,
He was, but forget his personality. That's not what I'm after. I'm after what you can do.
okay.
Yeah, yeah. But Nick, it's fun having you. Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, it could be good to know more about you because it's your first time around. People don't know you. Could be fun to poke around and just give them a quick presentation.
Sure. Um, so I've been working in games for about 16 years, um, mostly in free-to-play and kind of product management, live ops, and game design. And nowadays I consult on that and have been doing so for the last 7 years on, yeah, game design, economy, monetization, live ops, all that fun stuff.
Nick, are there any games you can reveal that you've been working on the past, let's say, year, 2, 3 years that people should know about?
Um, Not really. Unfortunately, there's a lot of stuff under NDA. Um, I mean, I can say like, over my consulting career, I've worked with studios like Rovio, like Good Game, Nitro Games, Cherry Pick, like a bunch of different studios, kind of mostly scattered around Europe.
Yeah. And it seems like it's mostly on the mobile side of things in our industry. Would that be correct? Or
Yeah, I've worked on a few PC titles as well. So, I mean, there is one game I can talk about on PC, like which was a few years ago. I helped out on Duelist 2, which was like a kind of reboot of the Duelist game, a kind of how to call it, like a hex battling, almost like deck management game, similar in style to something like a Hearthstone, but on a hex grid instead. Um, but yeah, that was pretty fun.
I'm actually
Yeah, but
Nick. I'm trying to find footage here. Would this be an accurate? Is this the Duelist?
yeah,
This looks
this
pretty
is
cool.
this is how Duelist looks.
What do you do in the game?
I mean, basically, it's like I said, it's a kind of a Hearthstone style of like
Okay.
of battling game, where you have your own deck of monsters and creatures, and you have a general, and then you're deploying them, defeating enemy units, picking up upgrades on the battlefield. Um, yeah,
Oh,
it's kind of a mid-core strategy, I guess I would call it, but it's pretty fun.
it looks fun. And I'm a huge fan of Hearthstone. At least the first 3 4 years of that game's life cycle. Um,
I mean,
and
yeah, as with all of these games, there's usually at some point like too much new stuff.
yeah,
Like the original vision kind of gets lost in many updates. I don't know if that's the case for Duelist. I have to say I haven't checked back in on it for a
yeah,
couple of years.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, just mentioning the words Hearthstone brings back so many good memories. It's one of the few games that I cared about to play on, if you want to call it a mobile device. It was an iPad, but I have these fond memories of being in the balcony. It was summer. It's summer right now, and it's really nice weather, and enjoying a cup of tea and just playing Hearthstone and enjoying that time. And the first, to your point, in the first 3 4 years, where you have a full understanding of all the characters and all the cards, and maybe you're not an expert in every single thing, but but it's not out of your control. And then past that point, you might be away for like 2 or 3 months. You come back and like, oh my god, I know nothing. Like they changed the game so much, but also probably provided a lot more content. And it becomes one of those things where after a while, it's infinite cards, and it's like, okay, I don't know what's happening here, so I can't master this, or I can't like um, build a reasonable deck. Um, but yeah, Nick, again, welcome on board, and thank you for joining us and filling in. On both Dave and Manu could not make it this week. I was telling you before the call that maybe we can focus on some design stuff and get your thoughts on some of the modern, what I would call, maybe I'm not the one who's only calling it, but maybe it's like we're almost in the TikTok era of type of video games. There's a specific flavor of video games that are coming up to the surface and getting a lot of traction. We saw that last year with the content warning. Recently, we saw Repo, and last week was it? I think Peak made a big splash. Um, I have my theory on the longevity of these games and what they're aiming to do, but I would love to poke around in your head as well and get some feedback there. Um, but how about this? We can. I mean, I told you this thing is supposed to be easy. You're just supposed to comment on the news, but obviously, if you don't have the links to them, it's going to be very hard for you to get an understanding of what the news is and what to say. Um, but I'll skip the highlights this week. I think both of you. So
Okay.
both me and you, like have are scratching our heads. However, I mean, we did report that on this a while ago. Like, okay, Capcom's financials show that embracing Steam has paid off handsomely, and for them, it now accounts for a third of the publisher's revenue. And I think it's one of those things where you have some of these traditional publishers who might have been focused on console. Capcom is absolutely one of them, historically speaking. But bringing their games to the PC audience and specifically on Steam has obviously opened up a completely new door for them from a financial point of view. Um, and this, in some ways, falls in line with the recent trends of platforms don't matter anymore. Um,
Yeah, it certainly
Everything's
feels
everywhere.
like. Sorry, I was just gonna say, like, it certainly feels like, as people talked about a lot in the wake of the Xbox layoffs
Mm.
and Microsoft layoffs in general, that like the Xbox as a console, like as a hardware, um, is not such an exciting priority for them anymore. There's so much focus on Game Pass, um, that it doesn't really surprise me that that's then forcing other publishers to go, well, like if Xbox isn't such a big deal for you, like it's not going to be a big deal for players. Where are the players going to be? And obviously, like PC gaming, I think is having a kind of very significant moment over the last several years, with the rise of extremely popular indie games, that aren't necessarily going to come to console very quickly. I'm thinking of things like Balatro or, even earlier than that, Slay the Spire and all these kind of games. Um, so it doesn't surprise me at all that Capcom is now going like, well, obviously we should have PC as one of our like leading platforms here because that's where we're going to find a bunch of players that otherwise we wouldn't necessarily get by going just the console route.
Nick, it's very interesting you're saying that because I used to say in the past that like or I would recommend I might have recommended in the past to some clients and said, you know what, if your game is not successful on Steam, if you bring it to console, you might find an audience there. But I feel like in many ways Steam has become that um, test case you make. If your game is not successful on Steam, it's not likely that it will be successful on other platforms. That's at least my kind of conclusion. I'm not sure what you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think Steam as a storefront, as an experience, is much more accessible than PlayStation Store or like Xbox Marketplace or anything like this because it allows you to go in very quickly, be recommended games, pick up stuff on a sale for very cheap.
Hmm.
Like everything feels very accessible. Um, so I think it's really the best place to kind of showcase. a game, try it out on an audience, and then yeah, if obviously that picks up steam, then depending on the type of game it is, then you can look at Switch or PlayStation or whatever else.
Absolutely. Um, and by the way, speaking of, you mentioned Game Pass and Xbox, and we do have a story here related to that. It's a two-parter that Manu has put together. One is Game Pass is an unsustainable model. Arcane founder slams Microsoft for its Game Pass focus after mass layoffs. Um, there's some context here that I am missing a bit, and I think I might have had an opinion on this last week or 2 weeks ago rather. Um, but do you maybe see that Game Pass will make its way to other platforms?
I don't know. I also don't. I don't have like a very kind of clearly thought out opinion on Game Pass in general. I mean, from a consumer perspective, obviously I could see like, all right, this seems like a good deal. Having this kind of Netflix for games type structure can make sense. For creators, though, I don't know how useful it is.
Yeah.
Like it's useful for a lot of studios in terms of like having Microsoft pay for you to finish development of your game or give you a chunk of money up front and go, you're going to be on Game Pass. Here's a bunch of money. Don't worry about it. But I mean, if they do that to many, many studios at the same time, like where where does your game fit in? Like how does your game stand out as something unique?
Yeah.
Um, so I when you think about Netflix and how it's done this with like movies and media, like Netflix has a balance of uh, relatively new movies from the last few years. It has its own new movies and new series, and it has a bunch of like legacy stuff.
Hmm.
And the legacy stuff doesn't really generate revenue anymore, I'm assuming. Like people still watch, reruns of Friends and all that kind of stuff. But I would estimate that like for studios, they're kind of fine leaving it on these platforms because it's a good source of passive income. They're not really gonna they weren't expecting much from it because it's already served its purpose. If if we think of the same for games, I mean, are we imagining that Game Pass is basically going to do something similar? Are they going to release like just new games, or
Hmm.
are they going to release like a bunch of old games and then some new ones that they've sponsored or that they've bought into? It makes me wonder like how new games really stand out because they're going to be crowded out by other new games. Netflix works because you don't have that many new things on there at the same time.
Yeah.
At least that's my feeling.
No, I mean we did see the report from April and Newzoo. Even that they're discussing like players are playing fewer titles or fewer new titles per year, and they're spending more time in other titles they're familiar with. I'm not sure what that is attributed to in relationship to if it's a post COVID thing, but I think what I'm seeing, at least like to your point on Netflix, and maybe that is also reflected on the Xbox Game Pass, which is there are too many options. I mean, options is good, right? And by the way, I'm showing Happy Gilmore 2 while we're speaking. The reason I'm doing that is because the first movie is one of my favorite all time movies. And I noticed my behavior on Netflix, and maybe this is the same. There's a parallel here to Steam and Game Pass and these things, where I browse through Netflix, and I'm not sure if this is just me, but I can't seem to find anything new that I want to watch. What I end up doing is watching old stuff. I would prefer like having access to this movie or these scenes that I'm looking to watch, and I just watch that. Um, but maybe that's just me. So, anyways, the
No, it's not
parallel.
just you.
Okay, it's not just me. I'm not special apparently. So, okay, but that speaks. That's very interesting. But we have that behavior. I was like even yesterday, like I see that Netflix has a lot of options for me that are of new content. But I'm not. I don't know why, but I'm not incentivized to watch it. and interact with it. And then I just want to draw the parallel here to Xbox Game Pass, which is, I mean, that catalog. I will. It's amazing. It's a crazy catalog, and it's like very few bad or dull or boring games there. Like every single game almost is like previously a million seller or currently like is a really highly rated game, quality content. But I'm having trouble. Like, and I might download like 5, 6 of them, but I don't play them. I don't know. That's also a very weird thing. And maybe it's one of those. What is that word called, or that phrase like you're paralyzed because
Choice
of,
paralysis.
yeah, something like that.
I mean, yeah, there might be a better term for it, but yeah, I can absolutely relate to that. I mean, I think, you and I have both been in games long enough that our Steam library is insane at this point.
Yep.
Um, I checked a couple of days ago and I'm up to about 530 games, of which I've played maybe 10%. Um, okay, maybe 20 on a good day,
Yeah.
but still, like there's so much that I will never play, even though it might be extremely well rated, even though it might be just, yeah, something that other people absolutely adore. Um, I also find myself coming back to familiar favorite games and experiences that I want to have again. Um, and I think it's always going to be challenging for new games to break through this. Um, I think this is also why we end up seeing so many sequels.
Yeah.
Um, like I was playing, for example, this last week I replayed Resident Evil Village. Really enjoy
Oh.
Resident Evil Village, and can't wait for Resident Evil 9 or
Yeah.
Requiem when it comes out next year.
Yeah.
Um, at the same time, a game like the Silent Hill 2 remake, I played a little bit of Silent Hill when I was younger, but never really got that into it. So I haven't picked up the remake, even though it's a really exciting prospect and I should.
Yeah.
I replayed Resident Evil 8 instead.
Yeah.
Like it's I think it speaks to partly budget and like money as well. Obviously, people don't have like infinite money to spend on games.
What is
Um,
that a thing? That's a joke that Dave
I
would
mean,
probably do. I'm trying to fill in for Dave here today.
nice. Um, but yeah, I don't know. It feels increasingly tough to break through
Yeah.
um, to break through in this way. But then, actually, maybe this leads nicely into what you were talking about with me slightly before as well about kind of more TikTok oriented games, like more shareable experiences
Yeah.
that people latch onto.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's also, I think, the sociability aspects of these games that allow for you're having fun. You're like it's the same thing as like if you remember. Do you remember the ice bucket challenge?
Yeah.
That's like the for me at least it was one of the first trends that happened that got CEOs and like very famous people to do it. Very like they did terrible job at doing it, but they tried to do it and they recorded themselves and like uploaded to YouTube and other platforms. And this was maybe 2012, 13 when it became a big thing. But it feels like these games are living in that same type of vein, or they're using that momentum of okay, hey, everybody's doing this, we're jumping here, we're having fun, and then my feeling has been that okay, they because I was actually very disappointed. Let me just bring that up again with content warning.
Hmm.
Uh, it's a great game. I'm not saying it's not a bad game. I'm just saying I'm disappointed from a charts point of view on Steam database because holy shit, like okay, they peaked on an all-time high of 204,000 people, um, and now it's completely dead almost. I don't think it's on console, and maybe it's also one of those things like if these games have that short of a lifespan, let me see how long it took. Oh, I mean, it was. Never mind me. Sorry. I mean, it was still alive for almost a year before, like, kind of. disappeared off the charts. No, sorry, give me a second here. I might be looking. Are these thousands? What am I doing here? No, sorry. Let me just go with the max again. I need to find the numbers that are early. Okay. Um, this is 2020. Yeah, 2024. So I mean, it released. Okay, it peaked 24, and then what are we looking at? We're looking at a month later. They're only down to 20,000 people playing.
Hmm.
Like that's like almost like a one of those YouTube videos explodes, everybody's watching it, and then like a week or two later, everybody forgot and moved on. And like I said before, now they're like around they're peaking. Their 24-hour peak is 1,500 people. Um, I don't think it's on console yet.
I don't think so. But I mean, with content warning, as I recall, I think they gave it away free
Yes,
for a
they did.
limited period as well,
Yeah,
which
I think
basically was cool for getting that initial spike, but maybe not sustainable. And I would be curious to actually know how much money it's managed to make from then going from free to a paid game.
yes. Thank you, Nick, for reminding us. That's actually true. I think it was a 24-hour thing because I think what Landfall does or what they're good at is like talking to their audience. And I think what they do is my understanding, historically speaking, and hopefully somebody can correct me if I'm wrong here, which is they release their game for free for 24 hours and then they start charging for it. But they tell people, hey, just so you know, we're going to start charging for it past this time or date. So that's a very good observation. But I mean, even that, like after a month, roughly. So they had a lot of people playing it, and then after 2 months, that's when it kind of like tapered off and completely disappeared almost. But I mean, is that a viable business um, way, like a way of like doing business as well? Maybe they find another way of delivering content.
I mean, I think in the case of Landfall, like you mentioned, they have a more unique approach to things, and honestly, it helps them build a following. It helps them stand out. So if it were like a brand new studio that were doing a strategy like this and saying, okay, free for a while and then paid,
Hmm.
I think they would struggle. But as part of a kind of longer term play where you're going, okay, well, this is how we're going to release these next games, but then we're going to release Peak, for example,
Yeah,
and that's going to be paid from the beginning. Like you've already built a huge following of people who are interested in also hearing from you because they think you might be offering something for free
yeah,
and discovering what crazy experience you've decided to make next. Because, I mean, the Landfall games are all stuff like there's also totally accurate battle simulator.
yep,
Um, there was a game that they released on Valentine's about like a crazy horse riding thing as well. I can't remember the name of it right now.
uh,
Um,
Nightfall, maybe
uh,
is that the one?
Nightfall, yes.
Yeah,
Um,
I haven't seen this one.
so yeah. Um, So it's one of these like interesting examples of I wouldn't recommend every business to operate like this, but I
Yeah,
think if it's a very long-term thing and you have like the ability to build an audience in this way, absolutely go for it. I mean, I think they're doing a great job.
absolutely. And I think to your point, I mean, oh wow, I didn't know you could do. Wow, this
Horse
Nightfall game.
drifting,
So
yeah.
yeah, you're on a. I was gonna say you're in a car, but you're on a horse and you're drifting the horse. It's like what the hell is going on here? But this is also like a testament to their style and their like wackiness and to your point, carved out an audience that they kind of almost they own that audience, similar to how From Software owns these action RPG type games with dark themes. Very interesting. But I'll go back to their list, and I want to talk more to you about, by the way, about Peak. Here's a thing I just noticed. They charge, and by the way, you mentioned talk about free. I didn't know that uh, Battleground or Totally Accurate Battlegrounds, as an example, is free. They have a couple of free games here, which is interesting. But what I want to ask is, like, you look at the price point here, right? And we're talking about like less than $10, generally speaking, for one of their games, and it's like almost parts of me feels like this is almost like a they're releasing the games separately, right? But it's almost like if you're a fan of Landfall and you pay like $10 every 6 months for a cool game to play, it's like almost like a subscription without being a subscription, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I hadn't actually checked the pricing before because I naturally would have assumed that most of their games at full price would be around the $20 mark.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of seems to be the price point for like a kind of relatively polished indie product. Um, but yeah, I mean, the fact that they're so low priced, I think is clearly something that they also care about for their audience. And it's the price point that also makes you go, okay, this might be a slightly like, I don't know, crazy physicsy experiment type game where I can drift horses, but it's going to cost me the equivalent of like a beer
Yeah,
in some places. So I think that I think that just appeals to also the experimental nature of the company, right?
I think you're on point there, and also you could argue that I mean, obviously, if I'm playing the game and I want to invite you, the barrier to entry and to get a full squad to play the game, if it's 4 people, let's say, so essentially that's a $40 game for 4 people to play. But I
Yeah.
love the analogy that you made to that, to the beer or the drink or whatever. That's the equivalent. Do you see, like, are they leaving money on the table though? Do you think?
I don't know. I think it's probably quite difficult for them to predict how successful their games are going to be,
Yeah.
um, because they're creating new stuff all the time, right? They're not chucking out sequels particularly. Um, so with that in mind, I think it's difficult to go like, okay, well, this game is obviously going to be so much more popular, therefore we can stick a higher price point on it.
Yeah.
Um, and like you said, in the case of Peak, I mean, the barrier to entry for this game compared to content warning is much higher because if you want to actually play it as it's meant to be played with 3 other people,
Hmm.
that means you're actually spending a combined total of $40 instead of 10.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
By the way, so let's. I mean, we were talking about Peak. We might as well dive into some of the design aspects and things. And I haven't played it. Just full disclosure there. Neither have you. But we have a gist about what it's trying to achieve and what's doing. Something I love when games take something simplistic, or rather a simplistic approach to game design. And I would love to hear from you, Nick, about this because I'm sure this is your domain. Um, a game that has that stuck out to me and kind of almost changed my life, maybe in the modern sense, which was Vampire Survivors. We might have spoken on this privately, where essentially speaking, you're just moving a character around, but
Hmm.
it's so fun and so engaging, and you spend 40 hours and you might have more fun playing that game than one of the latest AAA games. um in Peak, you have your stamina bar. You might have some options and things you can do, other things you can do, but your stamina bar is more or less the only thing that matters in relationship to the gameplay, the minute to minute gameplay. But do you have any thoughts here or anything you'd like to add about what makes this game or type of game unique?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot comes down to the different audiences that one can expect. So you mentioned FromSoft earlier. I mean, obviously they are the reigning champion of the Souls-like genre. Like every game that comes from them comes with a pedigree, but it also comes with like a clear audience in mind.
Hmm.
That is not something that people can pick up and play easily. It's like it's a very specifically targeted product. And for example, I know that when a new Souls game comes out, it's not for me. Like I don't have the time or the patience to learn how to play this game and to get good at it.
Hmm.
Um, a game like Peak or games that have very straightforward mechanics, like Vampire Survivors is a great example. Um, like you're focused on one thing. you're not trying to balance like parries and dodges and like optimize to the frame. You're All you're doing is focused on one thing, and
Hmm.
that just makes it feel like, okay, it can make a very shallow game experience, right? It can make games that are also fundamentally walking simulators, for example.
Yeah.
If you think about games like Dear Esther and Proteus and like this kind of slightly old school walking simulator vibe, those are games that are purely based on vibe. And you're doing one action, but you're kind of feeling the environment, and that can be enough. And Dear Esther has a bit more of a story and stuff like that as well. But when you have a game like Peak, and your only real objective is climbing, it's something that everybody can understand, but it's also got kind of this additional depth to it of like, yes, everybody can pick it up quickly, but actually to be good at it, to like to push yourself to reach the highest heights is far more of a challenge.
Hmm.
But the barrier to entry is so much lower than something complicated like a Souls game. Um, and I mean, really, I think whenever you have something that's also very physics based, people will strive, like there is an audience that kind of strives to overcome it and to do something kind of crazy and to like, I guess, to overcome the obstacles in front of them. You look at games like, I can't remember the name, I'm afraid. There's one that's about like climbing out of hell, where you're
The
chained together.
Chained Together. Yes, that is the game.
Well, perfect. They've named it well.
Yeah,
um,
they chose the right name there. Yeah, absolutely,
um, but then there's also Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy and stuff like this. That's
absolutely.
all like very, very like hardcore physics based. And a game like Peak is similar,
Yeah.
but it lowers that barrier to entry and makes it so that, okay, everybody could pick up and play this, and you can have such a fun time with it with your friends. I mean, again, I unfortunately haven't had the time to play it. My kind of gaming group, uh, I think, felt like it was a little bit too much of like, we're just going to push each other off mountains the whole time and never going to progress. Um, but yeah, there's
Um,
some getting over it.
yeah, showing a speed run here. I mean, it looks very simple when you look at it this way, but hell no, it's much more. You can see the reaction of I show speed. Um, um, yeah,
Yeah.
sorry if I was stopping your flow there.
No, no, no. Good.
Yeah. Um, how can I mean? So if we just take like Vampire Survivors, for me, I felt like okay, what was motivating me because I was dying a lot in the beginning, and I wanted to understand how do I optimize my character to survive for longer. So that was one of my internal goals. And speaking of internal goals, Nick, like how do you design games where people is it called intrinsically create goals for themselves because the game doesn't have like hey, go here stupid, do this stupid, like they don't tell you what to do, they just throw you in the world and like have fun. Peak is almost similar-ish in that regard, and Chained Together and all these games as well. It's very clear because visually with your eyes you can see, oh, okay, I'm here, I need to, or rather it's not like I'm here I need to go there, it's like I'm here I want to go there because it's very visual. Like you just look up and you see, okay, that's the destination. Um, are there any elements or things you'd like to point out on how to design these things that make players automatically create goals for themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think to a large degree, it's about setting a precedent. I think you need to reward player ingenuity and player effort.
Mm,
Um, so if you were to think about games like, I mean, you could argue that a game like Baldur's Gate 3 even has some like intrinsic motivation to go and to like search every corner, to like optimize your builds, to do all these kind of things. You don't need to do these to complete the game, but lots of people love to do it. Um, and the developers kind of reward you and allow you to do this. And in some ways allow you to break the game slightly. Um, in terms of how you design these kind of experiences, yeah, I think I think you need to reward experimentation. I think you need to reward effort.
Hmm.
Um, I think you need to provide the tools really for players to do things in their own way. Um, One of my favorite examples of
Yeah.
this is actually Satisfactory,
Okay. Yeah.
which
Tell me.
ba- like basically gives you it gives you a broad framework, um, and says, okay, here is your like next objective. Like you need to create these things, but within that, you're constantly having your own objectives. You're constantly deciding, okay, actually, I need to optimize my power system. Actually, I don't like this part of my factory because it looks ugly. It's not working as efficiently as it could. I actually want to rebuild this whole section, and I've got this new element now that like combines conveyor belts and stuff, and that's going to help optimize these production processes. Satisfactory is a game about constant like optimization and re-optimization. Um, so for
Yeah, I mean,
me,
is
it's a
there an
wonderful
ultimate
example
goal?
of kind
By the
of
way,
this. Sorry, say again.
sorry, Nick. I mean, is there an ultimate goal that the game or the designers want you to achieve, or is that something you set for yourself?
Yeah, there is like so. I mean, the premise for people who haven't played it is basically
Yeah.
you're dropped on an alien planet and you're basically there to harvest resources on behalf of the company or the corporation.
Gotcha.
I don't remember exactly.
Yeah.
Um, and uh, you have kind of milestone goals. So you need to create certain certain resources in order to then ship them off to build like your I think your space elevator first, and then like there's like a hovering thing in space that you're like sending these resources to, and
Hmm.
like these milestones basically form like the framework of what you have to do.
Got it.
Beyond that, you're pretty much given free reign. Um, and then, like I say, you're kind of building your own goals throughout. Um, Whether that's, okay, I want to go do some more exploring, so I'm going to build myself a rifle so I can deal with the local fauna, or whether it's, okay, I want to optimize my base in this way, or I want to go find a new resource that I can then like pipe into my base. There's so many kind of different things that you can be doing at any one time, and it just feels truly player driven.
Yeah. You're making your own. So you know what? That's almost the same thing as peak, where okay, I see that mountain. So in this case, okay, I need to ship resources to the ship in the sky or whatever. But it's up to me to figure out how to do that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. So
yeah,
you see an obstacle, and it's up to you to define how you want to overcome it.
yeah. I love that. Okay, well, I mean that's a. Are there any other things people can think about when they're making their games in relationship to this specifically to kind of like give the player the not necessarily the urgency, but the baton on how to reach the end goal.
I
I mean, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that you can think about is also just diversity of systems.
got it.
Um, like I said, I mean, in a game like Satisfactory, you have kind of a very, very strong, relatively complex, but also like easy enough to pick up building system. Um, like it can get complex if you get into inputs and outputs and like that level of optimization, but you don't need to.
Hmm.
Um, but then again, you also have a system of actually first person exploration and of light combat and stuff like this. And having a diversity of systems just allows for a diversity of approaches. And it means that if you're not that kind of player that necessarily wants to optimize the base, you could still have a fun time just exploring the world.
Yep,
So as long as you
absolutely.
have these kind of diverse approaches, again, if you think about Baldur's Gate 3,
Hmm.
um, not everyone plays the same. Some people play without healing and they're all glass cannons. Some people prefer to play, you know, a, a gang of there's a guy who makes YouTube videos about like four barbarian halflings or something like that, where you have a party of just halflings throwing people around.
Yeah,
Like it allows for people to make their own experiences.
yeah, that's awesome. I never thought about it that way, but I absolutely see it. It also brings some back some memories from I know one of the old ones that I played. and it's like to that endpoint, it's like, okay, the main mission is to, let's say, ship 10 gold or whatever to this place, but how you go about doing that, and then you might wander off and start doing other things that you like, that is fun in your um, management of resources, and where you ship things and how you ship them. So it gives you a bit more freedom and expressing your creativity without it feeling like without it feeling like a job almost.
Yeah.
Cool. No, that was a really cool insight. I really appreciate that, Nick. I'm trying to look at the. Do you have more time, by the way, or what's your?
Yeah, I've got more time.
We got some more time. So I'm trying to look at the newsletter and see if there are any other things. Monster Hunter. Did you play Monster Hunter, the last one?
No, I've tried one Monster Hunter game in my life, and it was one of those that I decided was not for me.
Well, what happened with Monster Hunter is, I mean, it exploded. It's almost like, I actually want to bring it up.
As in
Um,
people, as in players are angry, or
no, it
what kind of
exploded in the.
exploding?
Sorry, it exploded. Wow, it's still very, very popular. Like, wow,
Okay,
okay. You still have like 40,000 people playing today on Steam alone. But it was one of those experiences where me and a bunch of colleagues were really hyped. We got the game. We played for like 2 weeks intensely, and then we kind of like, okay, I think we've seen everything here. We've experienced everything. I still hear people talk about it, of course, but it kind of like, tapered off, which is not necessarily a bad thing. And they might introduce like, big content. But the news piece here that I wanted to highlight from this week was that Monster Hunter's Wild's quote unquote poor post launch reception bubbles up to the surface in shareholder meetings through Capcom. Again, speaking about Capcom, and Capcom is, of course, committed to fixing performance and content vows. So it was an amazing game, quality wise. Everything was fun. There was a lot of cool memes that came out of that game. There was a lot of talk about food. I'm not sure if you saw that. Monster Hunter like did food really, really well, visually speaking,
yeah,
and spiked sales on certain food items in restaurants. I think pizza or something like that in some places in the
nice.
world, which is very, very funny that that was an actual thing. Um, but there was, by the way, I was playing. I think I spent I spent like 10 or 20 hours, and then my save file got corrupted, and that's kind of like also part of why I stopped playing, unfortunately. Um, but anyways, but there's been like some performance issues on PC mainly. But
I
yeah,
see.
considering
Uh,
all that, I mean, we looked at the numbers just now. It looks pretty good.
Do they run it as a live service though? Is there a regular kind of content schedule or no?
This time, I don't know. I think historically speaking, it's more like these bigger chunks of DLC. But when I was playing a couple months ago, I think I did they did have a store, and it's one of those things. The Japanese publishers or developers, they're a bit odd in relationship to how they manage. Obviously, like, by the way, Nick, like Monster Hunter, when it comes to UI, it's it's one of the most ridiculous UI trees, or what, like, there are so many menus and menus and menus and menus, and like things are scattered, like just to play together in multiplayer is like, you need this chart to figure out how to play. uh, but
Mm,
historically speaking, the Japanese developers, when it comes to no, these very like in the West, it's very established on how a battle pass works, on how like a simple microtransaction store works. You have your premium currency and all that stuff. Like that, the flows have been optimized in the West, but from Japanese developers, like, I'm just scratching my head. So just to answer your question, I remember they had a store and you could buy things. um, it might have been, at least because I was playing on PlayStation, it might have been that when you want to buy something, it actually takes you to the PlayStation Store. It's not like built into the system, something like that. There was some wackiness and some weirdness there. Um, but I wouldn't call it like, I mean, in my book, it's a live service game, but I wouldn't call it live service in the form of like, your traditional, or not traditional, your modern way of, you have an in-game store, and you have the battle pass, and you have these things that always happen day in day out. Um,
Hmm.
so that's kind of like my takeaway. But they might have changed things since 2 3 months ago.
Yeah,
There is
I don't know.
yeah. Don't worry about it, Nick. I'm trying to fill in here for the other guys as well as much as I can. Speaking of live service games, I'm not sure if you've heard about this game. It's called Steel Hunters. I've never heard about it, but
This is
the
from
the
Wargaming, right?
is it okay? We'll dig into it a
I
bit.
think so.
Uh, but okay, so this article is yet another live service game announces shutdown just 3 months after early access launch. And this is like they're shutting down in early access. They're not shutting down like post like quote unquote launch. And it's wargaming. I've never seen this game before. I'm very surprised considering is it wargaming like swimming in money?
I mean,
Or,
Wargaming is World of Tanks, and they have World of Tanks Blitz as well, which is their mobile version. They also have World of Warships, and I don't know if they still have Warships Blitz. But
yeah.
I mean, yes, they generated a ton of money from those early titles, particularly World of Tanks. Um, and I mean, the fact that they're swimming in money, I think, though, actually maybe makes them more emboldened to take this kind of decision. Because if something's not working after a few months and people like the fan base isn't resonating with it, then like maybe it's better to just cut your losses and move on.
Okay.
But,
Because I would
but
have
yeah, for
thought they
reference,
would. Yeah.
sorry, go
Sorry,
ahead.
Nick. I thought they would have given it a bigger chance, but maybe you're right. I mean, well, what do I know?
I don't, I don't
Uh,
know. I mean, it's a mech battling game, right? So it's
yeah.
um, I mean, I guess you're trying to appeal to people who liked playing Mech Warrior back in the day, and who don't have a reasonable proxy now. I don't know how big that audience is though. Um, like maybe there is still an opportunity there. Maybe the execution wasn't good enough. I really have no idea. Like I haven't
Okay.
played Steel Hunters either. I did read that
Uh,
article
yeah.
before you shared it with me actually, and
Okay.
like I was also surprised to learn about it. Like I hadn't heard of this game either.
I'm sharing on
So
screen a game called Mecha Break. This was also mentioned in the
mhm.
article, and apparently this game um, got like 300,000 active users or CCU of users playing. It's a Chinese game. Also, never heard
Yeah.
of it, of course. There are so many games these days, but there is that theory in the article saying like this game might have overshadowed the Steel Hunters game.
I mean,
Uh,
potentially, but they also look quite different in style. I mean, this seems to
yeah,
represent a more kind of Gundam-like style,
yeah,
um,
absolutely.
from manga and anime and stuff. Whereas, like, the other was clearly going for a more Mech Warrior vibe of just kind of bigger, chunkier, less stylized machines.
Yeah,
Um, yeah.
um, yeah. This is. I mean, this. I'm not sure if we're gonna see more of a more quote unquote live service games, like in the modern sense, come out, or that people are willing to put more investment in these types of games. Just feels like there's just so much room, and everybody has tried to do it. And obviously, we saw Sony killed Concord, and they have Marathon now, and that, in my opinion, that game is probably going to get killed. We'll see if that happens or not. With all respect, of course, to the people involved. But it just feels like okay, this we always go through these times in our industry where like everybody's gonna do this and then everybody's gonna do this like but it feels like okay we're at the tail end of that. Would that
Yeah.
be
Well,
accurate? What do you think?
yeah, I would agree. I mean, and the thing is, when you jump on a trend, then you have to keep in mind the actual time to build a game
Yeah,
on top of that. So, like, everybody jumps on the kind of live service extraction shooter trend that we were
yeah,
talking about at this point probably 2 years ago. And now you're basically finally getting a bunch of games from that discussion. Even though there have already been games out doing that for a few years that have managed to build up more solid fan bases and have managed to retain them and keep it interesting. I mean, I'm thinking specifically of games like Tarkov at this point.
Yeah.
Um, and then obviously like your more classic PUBG, kind of Apex style live service games. I think in general, like the live service model can work really well. Um, and on mobile, it is very much like the de facto standard.
Yeah.
Um, but for PC and console, it I think there's a limit on how far we can go.
Yeah.
Um, and for me, at least, it feels like okay, we've maybe now hit that point where rather than focusing on building a live service experience for a very broad audience, maybe try and narrow it down and focus on actually a very specific audience that you want to play your game. And again, coming back to something like Landfall, and Peak particularly, like that is a game for people who want to have stupid fun with their friends in a video game, and that's it. And
Yeah.
it doesn't need to be more than that because that's the audience for it. They are clearly defined. There are enough of them to make making that game justifiable.
That's a really good point. By the way, I have to ask you because you are in the mobile world. Like, how come the mobile audience accepts that behavior? It's part of the mobile world. That's like, and what I mean by behavior, I mean as in it just feels like. And again, I don't play mobile games, so I don't know. But the last time I tried to do research is like every game you start, they're like A/B optimized to like the nth degree, and they all behave the same way. They all have these templates of okay, you got your currency and you got your boxes that you click, and oh, you have 10 hours left to do this thing or whatever it is. Don't mobile players get tired of that? I mean, what happens there?
Um, it's a good question. I think in general, you look at mobile game players um, as people who consume multiple games at the same time. Um, they're going to be less focused on one specific product. Um, so that's one
Okay.
part of it, and I think there is a large section of that audience which is probably now, as you say, very like tired of these kind of flows and processes. But the problem is that you also need to appeal to basically anybody who downloads your game. Um, and in the data that I've worked with quite often, like usually take the tutorial. The tutorials are all pretty much the same for a specific genre. However, if you were to remove that tutorial or like drop players into the game too quickly without giving them clear guidance, your retention rate drops. Like the player churn is gigantic at that moment
Mhm.
specifically, and you can see it in the data. So because mobile games also have to appeal to such a broad audience of basically everybody who has a mobile phone and who could download this, you need to also make sure that you're not like excluding those people. Um, and this is actually becoming even more important because the cost of player acquisition on mobile is very, very high and is very
Mhm.
difficult to do these days, due to some like basically regulatory changes that Apple and Google brought in several years ago now.
Yeah.
But user acquisition used to be easier, now it's much harder, which means that every player you get, you cling on to desperately.
That's really good insight, Nick. I feel like I mean, I'm not the mobile person, obviously, but it feels like that entire world is like there's a different. It's like almost different, completely different things. Even though they're all video games, but how you work in them and the mindset and all that stuff is completely different from how we make
Yeah, I mean,
traditional
I,
games.
I think I think mobile in general is
Yeah,
very much more kind of like you get out an MVP, you get KPIs, you try and optimize those KPIs, you build a metagame around it, and then you launch a thing, and like
yeah,
you're basically trying to constantly like build a kind of solid core and then build outwards while optimizing your KPIs at every step of the way. Whereas, yeah, PC games and kind of AAA development in general is a lot more risk prone. because you don't get to have this early feedback. You
Hmm.
basically have to build something, release it all at once, and kind of hope for the best. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, there's stages of playtesting and stuff you can do in the in between time, but on mobile, I think it is much more standard.
Oh, and speaking of risk, I'm gonna go back to my side of the business, and
Go
this
for
is
it.
like I love this person. I'm sure you know who it is, Yoshe. Good lord, no, I'm butchering his name, unfortunately. But Shuhei, not Yoshe, Shuhei Yoshida, former PlayStation executive, reveals that AAA publishers aren't signing as many games as the jump from PS4 to PS5 because development costs doubled, um, which is pretty wacky. And we've spoken about this before. I would love to hear your opinion because I've spoken to the guys about this before, and specifically saying examples of playing Uncharted 2 was 15 years ago roughly at this point was so much more fun than playing The Last of Us 2 that probably costed like 3-4 times as much, which is crazy. And I'm not seeing the value. I mean, graphics have reached a point now. Anybody can make a good-looking game. Indies. I mean, we Peak was. I mean, yes, it has style. It looks great. It doesn't have to look much more, more beautiful than that to be playing well and having fun. But I'd love to hear if you have any thoughts about this, and maybe you can give us some ideas of how mobile games think about graphics, if at all. Uh, but
Yeah, I mean, sorry, go ahead.
we have a kid here walking around. Okay, hello there. I'm in a meeting, bro. Recording, so you can just go out. Okay, I'll see you.
That's all good.
Okay, yep.
All
It's
right.
more there at home.
Um,
You know how it goes.
of course. I know it well. So on the mobile side of things, graphics are important, but I guess style is probably more important.
Mhm.
Like you don't need to make something look spectacular, but it needs to look good for your audience.
Yeah,
Um, and I mean, also keep in mind, obviously, with the smaller screen, like fidelity is far less important than when you're playing on like a 70-inch TV or something.
yeah,
Um, so, so there is that side of things. I mean, it's an interesting it's an interesting quandary to have though about like the increased cost of development. I wonder how much of that is because of graphics though, because like I'm not a technical person myself. I'm also not an artist, but at least to me it appears like you can make quite good looking games as an indie now. Like you can hop onto Unreal, like buy a few like asset packs from the store and like
yeah,
you're away. And
yeah.
you can make something that looks really nice. Um, so I wonder how much of it the is really about the graphic side of things.
Yeah.
In my very limited experience of having worked in AAA, um, what I found I think more surprising was like I think was the speed of like iteration, which again compared to mobile is very slow. Um, like mobile, you want to test something out, you can test something out within a day. When you're developing for PC and console and it's a project that's been rumbling on for a few years, then suddenly you have to have buy-in from 15 decision makers and like and you have to basically turn an oil tanker
Yeah.
instead of a go-kart. It's like it really is that different. Um, so I wonder how much of it is really about agility and the ability to kind of change pace quickly and to like change direction and adapt versus the actual like cost of building a thing.
You're so right on that, Nick. And I mean, I think this is the superpower of the indie developers on my side of the fence, right? Where like if you have a team of 5, 10 people, they can just like, it's not an oil tanker that they're gonna change the direction of. It's the go-kart that you described, and they can just immediately make, oh yeah, that feature that sucked, let's just move on and do that other thing, or try that other thing and see how that goes. um, and I used to be in this mindset, if I ever start a studio, or if I ever like have a team, I used to be in the mindset of, no, yeah, the cutoff is like for the optimal studio is maybe 100 people, but now it's like, no, it's probably like around the 20 people mark. More than 20 people, it becomes like out of hand in terms of like, trying to um, get things to move fast and iterate faster. And if you have like 100 people, I mean, just the communication part, like just that part takes so much time to get through. But I hope that we can go back to a time so we don't have to be in this, because right now we're in the, it feels like the era um, of layoffs, at least on the traditional game making side of things, hasn't ended, and it feels like we haven't seen the bottom of it, or the top of it, whatever, whichever you want to pick. Um, and I wonder if we can go back to these days when we can make AAA, AA, call them whatever you want to call games, um, of these bets of, okay, let's do a $10 million bet, a $5 million bet, maybe a $20 million bet, not a 150, 200, 300, or in the case of Concord, $400 million. Makes no sense at all. It makes no
Ouch.
sense at all. Yeah, that's crazy, crazy.
But I
Um,
agree with you actually that like I think we will reach that point again. Like I remember particularly around like PlayStation 2 era and also PlayStation 3 era, like there were a lot of kind of double A games out there. There was a lot of stuff that like broke through and found an audience and sustained developers, like actually allowed people to have companies. But then, I mean, my take on it is basically what's pretty much also happening in mobile, which is that there's a lot of M&A going on where like studios consolidate and buy other studios and kind of collect all the resources in one. Then they try and optimize the shit out of those resources,
yeah,
lay off a bunch of people, and that's exacerbated also by AI to some degree. Um, and and then you're kind of left going, well, what's going to happen now? The problem is that it's not a sustainable model. Like there will need to be a kind of a place for all of these very talented game
hmm
makers to go, and that will result, I believe, in more kind of indie and more double A studios. Um, and the fact is that as we've seen over the last few years, some of the games that come from these are going to be wildly popular and are going to
yeah.
outperform people who are spending 400 million on a game. So, like, I think my perspective is that the bigger companies, like the giant conglomerates, can continue making their giant bets, but there will be an increasing space, in my view, for smaller companies to make smaller bets. They will need some startup capital probably, so the VCs would also need to adapt slightly, um, and actually find success with that again.
By the way, sorry, Murray. I was googling this stuff, and I found an article from 2009. Okay, and this is crazy to read this. Like, what are we now? 2025. So this is 16 years ago. And this article, VG 2047 or whatever, 24/7. Uncharted 2 has a budget of 20 million, says Wells. Wells used to be one of the co CEOs of the studio, and here this is a quote from him. Um, where is it? Where is I was gonna read this thing. He was saying, he was mentioning that this is a budget, $20 million for Uncharted 2 is a budget developers would dream of, but in the context of today and how much money is burnt on some projects, this is chump change. It's crazy. Um,
Yeah.
Yeah, but I hope we can get to that point. But I mean, if you think about it, Uncharted 2, yes, fidelity wise versus what we have today is not on that level, but the cinematics, the voice acting, the mechanics, the gameplay, it was amazing. It was amazing, and I think if you open it up today, it's still going to be fun to play. And speaking of games you open up today, I downloaded and played Half Life 2 a month or two ago, and I was like, holy shit, this is still good to this day. I don't need it to be more fancy, if you want to use that word.
Hmm.
It was a very good game, and it still is to this day. And I hope we can go back to these things where we understand what is valuable to the player.
Yeah, I had very much the same feeling when last year I replayed Deus Ex, which is one of my favorite games of all time. And like, yeah, I used like a kind of texture improvement mod, but beyond that, like just the gameplay, like the choices, the like the feeling of the game was wonderful. And it surprises me that there aren't more games that kind of try and achieve this through having a very clear identity as opposed to just having fancy graphics.
Awesome, Nick. That was on point. I think we can cut it here. I'm sure you have other things to do. This was really enjoyable. Thank you so much for joining us this week. I had a lot of fun
My
talking to
pleasure.
you. Um,
Likewise.
I missed to do I so this is like, because I enjoy talking to the guests. I miss doing these stupid things that people do in the beginning of videos or in the beginning of the shows, which is like, yeah, please help out, like, subscribe, hit the bells, click buttons, do things, please. We would really appreciate that. Of course, if you're listening in, we got one of the most important newsletters you need to subscribe to, which is the Guys Weekly.substack.com newsletter, game industry executive summary. Please head over to Guys Weekly, GIES, weekly.substack.com. Subscribe. I think you'll find a lot of value in it, especially in a world where we barely have any time. Nick, again, this was great. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. And I'm looking forward
Yeah,
to having
thank you
you on
again.
board again. You'll be our mobile expert, among other
Sure.
things. Among other things. Okay. Have a nice
Cool.
day, and I'll see you on the next one.
Sounds good. See you
Bye.
later. Bye.